how does he get out of there? Where does he go?
Once he leaves, what we might say was the last of these Buddhist oases that he was visiting, he goes up over and through the mountains, following routes that, well, probably the traders and the nomadic herders would have used, that sometimes go up over very high mountain passes. Some of them are very difficult of access. If you go in the wrong time of year, a snowstorm can catch you and kill you and all your people. And he then comes down in what is now Kyrgyzstan, near this wonderful big lake called Issyk-Kul. And he travels along the shore of it, and in that region, probably somewhere to the west of it, he comes to the camp of another one of the very important people at this time, who was the Turkish Kagan, the ruler of a Turkish state, which occupied a large territory in Central Asia. He describes his reception there. The Kagan is wearing garments made of Chinese silk.
Wow, all the way to the west there.
Yes.
When we say Turkish, we don't mean that he's from Turkey. We mean he's speaking a Turkic language.
Turkic language, where his ancestors came from. Well, the homeland of these Turks who formed the empire was somewhere probably in what is now Mongolia.
So he's there, he's met the Turkic Kagan, he continues on his way.
Yes.
Where does he go?
At that point, he kind of skirts the edge of the mountains. He doesn't go way out into the desert, because if you keep going west, you get into very dry country in parts of Central Asia. But he skirts the mountains, so you're always near some source of water and pasturage for the animals.
These are high mountains, too, with snow melt and things like that.
These are high mountains. And one of the first places he comes to of real importance is what we now call Samarkand, which back in those days had an area right outside the modern city, which we know as Afrasiyab. And that was the homeland of the Sogdians. He talks a little bit about the fact, it's too bad, but Buddhism has kind of died out here.
This valley here is fairly fertile. There's enough water. They grow crops.
Samarkand is located right next to the foothills of the mountains. There's very good pasturage around it, and there's a very good permanent source of water right near the city. And they had canals, actually, that were man-made that brought the water into the city.
So then from there,
the place that really stands out in his account is he goes through the valley of Bamiyan in central Afghanistan, where the famous Buddha statues were.
Giant Buddhas.
The giant Buddhas that were then destroyed by the Taliban. On his way to the homeland of Buddhism, which means he crosses one of the famous passes from what is now Afghanistan into what is now northern Pakistan, there are major Buddhist centers. In fact, in northern Pakistan, one at Taxila, which is just west of the modern Islamabad. He probably visited there. There were important Buddhist monasteries. And then he goes on and ends up in the valley of the Ganges and the foothills of the Himalayas.
Yeah. So he leaves India on his way back. He's been abroad now for almost 20 years. How does he get back?
Well, he was provided by one of the rulers in India with transport for a treasure trove of Buddhist manuscripts and Buddhist icons, that is, carved statues, which were considered to be particularly holy images. And he was bringing all of this back with him. Some of that stuff got lost en route because there was a flash flood in a gorge and that kind of thing, and it was lost. But ultimately, he makes his way to the eastern end of the Taklamakan. He stops at Dunhuang and the Mogao Caves, where right about the time when he was there, one of the most important of the Tang-era Buddhist caves was being painted.
That's the cave that they're looking at right now.
Yes. The painting is an image of the Western paradise of the Buddha. It is probably the earliest complete depiction in Chinese Buddhist art of that Western paradise, which was an important representation in Mahayana Buddhism, which had become very prominent in this period. The scene of the Western paradise shows, you might say, the Buddha with his accompanying court of the bodhisattvas. And in the foreground is a pool in which the souls are being reborn out of the lily has. And then in the foreground, you have an orchestra and dancers, because the Buddhist paradise, has this wonderful music, it has this wonderful light, these great things that you can expect when you pass through and you're reborn in the next life. And so in the foreground, there are two dancers wearing rather risque veils who are pirouetting, probably in a Central Asian dance style, which of course brings us to another aspect of exchange on the Silk Road, because music and dance from Central Asia was very popular in China in this period.
So Dunhuang is really one of these places where lots of different cultures cross.
That's right.
So our hero gets back to Chang'an.
Well, in fact, he is rapturously received, probably because messengers had gone on ahead of time informing them that this great journey had been completed, and he's bringing back this wonderful material. And so with official support, what we might call a translation center was created with the Great Goose Pagoda, which was to house the library. What Xuanzang contributed was very sophisticated and probably a lot more intelligible translations of many of the Buddhist texts than had existed in China previously, thanks to the fact that he learned the languages well. He studied in the homeland of Buddhism, and he brought back with him new copies and better copies of some of the scriptures.
And so it wasn't a problem that he was introducing Western values into China?
Well, no. I mean, they had been introduced much earlier, but of course there's a great deal of fluctuation. Buddhism comes in, Buddhism at some point is persecuted, Buddhism then gets official support, and then under the Tang, of course, it goes back and forth. After Xuanzang, there's a period of very severe persecution of Buddhism that the famous Japanese traveler Enin reported on in his travel diary.
Yeah, A35.
Yeah.
This sometimes is treated as an image of Xuanzang. As far as I know, we don't really have paintings, maybe some murals, rough murals from this period, but not scrolls. If it's not Xuanzang, what is it?
There is, of course, a lot of imagery of these religious figures that we call arhats, being a person who was on the road to, what should we say, enlightenment. And there is a cycle of pictures of the arhats, which very often show their characteristic features. One of them's always shown with a tiger. Sometimes the image, in fact, of Xuanzang, or what people say is Xuanzang, is shown with a tiger, but he's actually one of the arhats. This one, of course, could be a pilgrim carrying his pack. Some of the versions of this image show you scrolls in that pack that are piled up as though he actually put them on his back to carry them back. The image was obviously adapted and relabeled by somebody.
Xuanzang writes, or somebody writes for him, a record of my journey to the West. The Tang Emperor is very interested in this. After all, China has a long tradition of knowing something, sending armies out into the Western regions. This is good intelligence, up-to-date intelligence that he has. His record becomes the basis for one of the most famous early novels in Chinese history, The Journey to the West, the Xiuji. And so I brought along a version of that novel from the 18th century in Chinese, and I thought you might enjoy seeing a picture of Xuanzang in this novel with his horse. Now the novel is a bit of a supernatural fantasy, I have to admit. It's the story with which you have the figure called Monkey, right? The Monkey King. But suppose he had wanted to go further west.